Link TV presents Mosaic World News from the Middle East. Here are today's top stories.
Jewish extremists storm Jerusalem's Al-Aqsa Mosque. Somalia's al-Shabab claims responsibility for blasts in liberated Kismayo. And Iranian Rial falls to all-time low as Western sanctions take hold. Mosaic World News from the Middle East begins now.
Israeli police arrested 3 Palestinians after a fistfight that occurred in the courtyards of the holy Al-Aqsa Mosque. This news comes after a group of settlers stormed the mosque's courtyards. The police also arrested 2 settlers after they performed prayers in the courtyards. In addition, settlers assaulted the Franciscan monastery in Jerusalem and wrote slogans insulting Christians and Christ, peace be upon him. The Israeli occupation reinforced its security presence in Jerusalem during the days that coincide with the Jewish celebrations of what is known as Sukkot, or the Festival of Booths.
Nearly 100 settlers, headed by Moshe Feiglin, leader of the extremist wing of the Likud ruling party, stormed the courtyards of Jerusalem's noble sanctuary under the protection of Israeli occupation forces. The settlers were confronted by dozens of Muslim worshippers. The scene quickly escalated into a physical altercation, which ended with the arrest of 3 Palestinians. The occupation's forces also arrested Feiglin and another settler for disobeying orders and performing Talmudic prayers in the noble sanctuary courtyards.
This new crime is a part of the campaign that's being waged against the holy Al-Aqsa Mosque. Israel is now plotting to build the alleged Temple Mount and to change the status of the holy Al-Aqsa Mosque regarding shared prayer times and areas.
This aggression, which comes amid the celebrations of the Jewish Sukkot holiday, was preceded by tight security measures around Al-Aqsa Mosque. Muslims under the age of 45 were prevented from performing prayers at the mosque. Not far from here, Jewish settlers attacked the Franciscan monastery in Mount Zion. They wrote slogans insulting Christ, peace be upon him, and signed them with the phrase, price tag. This was quickly erased by occupation forces before the arrival of the media.
Israeli authorities are apparently not taking matters very seriously. They don't want to deal with this dangerous phenomenon. I believe this dangerous phenomenon is posing a threat not only to Muslims and Christians, but also to all reasonable people in the region.
Israeli police said that they are investigating the incident and are trying to see if it's linked to other recent aggressions.
We are evaluating this serious aggression and are doing everything in our power to identify the address of the person who wrote these phrases.
However, this series of aggressions continues. Previous attacks were also launched against the Latrun Monastery near Jerusalem, as well as mosques in the occupied West Bank, without the arrest of suspects in most cases. It coincides with calls for dividing prayer times between Muslims and Jews at the noble sanctuary, in addition to calls for turning its courtyards into public spaces frequented by everyone. Palestinians believe that the attacks on the Muslim and Christian holy sites would not take place if it weren't for the protection provided by the occupation to the perpetrators. These acts of aggression appear to be a test of Jerusalemites' reactions before they launch premeditated plans that could be much worse. Elias Karam, Al Jazeera, Occupy Jerusalem.
The Somali al-Shabab movement announced its responsibility for 2 explosions that took place today in the Somali city of Kismayo, which was its last main stronghold, vowing to conduct more attacks. African Union forces, backed by tanks, had entered the city for the first time since Somali and Kenyan forces defeated al-Shabab's fighters.
It seemed like just a short while ago, these beaches in Kismayo were the last stronghold of the Somali Muslim al-Shabab movement. Government forces have entered it, augmented by thousands of soldiers from the African Union forces. A violent explosion shook one of the buildings in the city, but no damage or losses were reported. Al-Shabaab movement claimed responsibility for the explosion and vowed to wage more attacks on the city. The news received from Kismayo mentioned that Kenyan military units, backed by tanks, were at the front lines of the African Union forces who were deployed on Tuesday in different parts of the city. Officials announced that these forces took retook their positions and took full control of the city after securing its main areas, among them the port, airport, and police stations. A Somali official said that dozens of al-Shabab fighters were arrested and called on all fighters of the movement to put down their weapons. Al-Shabab rebels exerted their influence on the city for over a year. However, they announced their withdrawal from the city on Saturday after an extensive attack waged by Kenyan and African Union forces. Kenyan forces once again advanced 200 meters into Somaliland after 17,000 soldiers from the African Union forces were added to their numbers. Anwar Al-Ansi, BBC.
The suffocating financial crisis that Iran is facing has boiled over into the internal situation there, as Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad attempts to dispel accusations of shortcomings by his government while admitting that international sanctions have affected the Iranian economy.
The suffocating financial crisis that Iran is facing began to show signs in Iran's internal situation. The pace of objections against the government of Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad have risen as a result of its silence on the sharp fluctuation in the currency markets after the Iranian Rial hit its lowest level in history against the dollar on the open market. The government's silence in responding to this crisis led many circles to contest the government's performance in confronting the crisis. What is prominent in this campaign is the caliber of people contesting the government's performance. Among them is Hussein Shariat Madari, president and editor-in-chief of the Iranian Kayhan newspaper. He criticized the government and the silence of the economic authorities in the country, saying that they put the currency market in the hands of a known mafia without clarifying what the mafia is. The semi-official Iranian Fars news agency, which speaks for the Revolutionary Guard, stated that the government remains silent with regard to the currency crisis the country is facing. It questioned whether the silence in this case is a sign of satisfaction with their actions or whether those responsible for decision-making in the economic arena have been struck with depression and obscurity. On the other hand, Iranian President Mahmoud Ahmadinejad accused the West of waging an economic war on Iran. He denied the presence of a shortage of hard currencies in the Iranian market and clarified that the Iranian Rial was devalued because of international sanctions on Iran. In a press conference, Ahmadinejad said he sees a psychological war accompanying this external international pressure, which led to the devaluation of the currency. He noted that the central bank is trying to provide for all the demand for hard currencies and called for combating violators in his country's currency market. And as trading began, the exchange rate for Iranian rials to American dollars fell by 2.6%. This comes one day after the rate's dramatic decline of 17%. The American dollar is currently being sold in Tehran markets for 37,000 rials.
Clashes continue in Syria between regime forces and the armed opposition as al-Asaad denies he was besieged in Aleppo.
The pace of violence is escalating in Syria. Today's clashes raged in several areas of the country. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said that at least 11 people were killed in shelling and attacks, especially in the countryside of Damascus. Meanwhile, violent clashes continued in Aleppo between regime forces and opposition fighters. Syrian television said that Syrian security forces destroyed what it called terrorist dens and confiscated weapons and ammunition. Government media outlets mentioned the deaths of the rebels, among them a Tunisian. On the other hand, opposition websites said that civilian casualties fell in the city of Sarkin in northeastern Syria, which was subjected to the regime's tanks and artillery shelling. The Syrian Observatory for Human Rights said that violent clashes took place between regime forces and Free Army fighters in the cities of Al-Qadam and Asali in the capital. The clashes were accompanied by violent shelling, which caused injuries and damaged some homes. As for Aleppo, the violence was what it usually is. Clashes between regime forces and opposition fighters took place in the outskirts of the neighborhoods of Arqub and Suleiman al-Halabi. Meanwhile, the neighborhoods of Sheikh Khoder, Sahur, and Sheikh Faris have been shelled by Syrian regime forces. The observatory confirmed that a number of people were injured in violent shelling conducted by regime forces on the neighborhood of Masakin Hanano. Politically, in the opening of its regular session, the Syrian People's Assembly speaker waged an attack on Saudi Arabia regarding the Syrian crisis.
يأتي في سياق مواصلة المملكة السعودية.
This comes in the context of the Saudi kingdom's ongoing blatant aggression, as well as its affiliation with the West, which targets Syria and its people through its claim of being the custodian of the two noble sanctuaries.
ويتناغم مع محاولتها المحمومة.
This is consistent with their desperate attempts to undermine Syria and its stability by supporting, funding, and giving arms to the armed terrorist groups.
As for Prime Minister Wael al-Halki, he confirmed his government's persistence in continuing to get rid of the terrorists who are trying to strike the country economically after they were defeated militarily. The leader of the Free Syrian Army, Colonel Rial al-Asaad, denied reports that regime forces besieged him in Aleppo. He also denied traveling with a number of Free Army officers to Israel, but did not give his whereabouts. He described those who came up with the allegations as real agents of the Israeli enemy. As a response to the possibility of Damascus using chemical weapons and Tehran's reaction to such an approach, Iranian Foreign Minister Ali Akbar Salehi said the following.
Iran is the anchor of security.
Iran is the anchor of security. If this theory were to come true, everything would end. If any country, including Iran, used weapons of mass destruction, it would end the legitimacy of this government.
Salehi's words came during his participation in a discussion circle organized by the American Council on Foreign Relations.
With local politics, many reports circulating today are saying that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is on the verge of calling for new elections, perhaps as soon as in 2 weeks. He met this morning with Finance Minister Yuval Steinitz to discuss the possibility of passing the state budget, which would be one of the factors in deciding whether Israelis will go to early elections. Joining me now to discuss the political landscape is IBA's Eli Walkerlander. Eli, good evening.
Good evening. Thank you, Yochanan. Are we about to have new elections? There's been talk of this before, but now it's sounding more and more likely. Prime Minister Netanyahu met with Finance Minister Steinitz this morning to discuss whether to try to pass an unpopular proposed budget or resort to calling early national elections. For the past few weeks, Netanyahu has tried through various channels to persuade coalition partners to support the necessary budget cuts and avoid early elections. While all the parties have agreed in principle, so far they have been unable to reach agreement on the details. Netanyahu has said he prefers passing the budget to holding early elections because he believes the new coalition he will have to form after the elections won't be as stable and convenient for him as the current one. But Likud sources say that it now looks impossible, so preparations are being made for early elections. Netanyahu is planning to hold a series of meetings with his coalition partners this week and next to see if an agreement can be reached on the massive budget cuts he deems necessary for next year. Following these talks, Netanyahu is expected to decide whether he sees a reasonable chance of passing the budget. The Knesset returns to session on October 15th, which leaves 2 weeks until November 1st to submit a new budget and 2 months after that to pass it. If Netanyahu sees he doesn't have a budget agreement, then he will call early elections, perhaps on the first day of the new Knesset session. There are also reports saying Netanyahu's main reasons for early elections are political rather than budgetary. For one, a decision to approve an austerity-filled budget before elections would hurt mainly the Likud, but the political considerations also involved who else would be running in the next elections. Rumors are still floating that former Prime Minister Ehud Barak plans to return to politics, which could undermine Netanyahu. So if elections are brought forward to what now looks like February, Barak would not have enough time to prepare, and his return to politics would be delayed. And the latest polls show Likud winning 28 Knesset seats, one more than the current 27, and that too could factor into the decision to hold elections as soon as possible. The Likud is afraid that over time, other parties are liable to gain strength at Likud's expense, as the public will blame the party for the austerity measures. So, Yochanan, it's looking more and more likely that an announcement for early elections will be declared later this month.
Okay, Eli, thanks for that report. The United States has called on European governments to help stop the Palestinian Authority's attempt to upgrade its status at the United Nations to that of a non-member state. This according to the Guardian newspaper, which cited a U.S. memorandum sent to EU governments describing PA President Mahmoud Abbas's UN maneuver as extremely counterproductive and warned of significant negative consequences for the PA, including financial penalties. The memo reportedly emphasized that Palestinian statehood can only be achieved through direct talks with Israel. The U.S. State Department declined to comment on the issue. The report followed yesterday's announcement by Chief Palestinian Negotiator Saeb Erekat that the PA had started consultations with Arab countries over the phrasing of a request for UN non-member status. Defense Minister Ehud Barak harshly criticized Foreign Minister Avigdor Lieberman for calling Abbas the biggest obstacle to peace and advocating his removal from office. Barak said that Lieberman's comments do not represent Israeli policy and actually harm the country's interest. The defense minister added that if Lieberman's dream were to be realized and Abbas is ousted, it would be Hamas that would take over. Barak insisted that Israel maintains a basic interest in ensuring security in the West Bank, which currently is in a relatively good state. He said that although the situation is mainly due to the efforts of Israel's security forces, the PA also deserves credit for the relative stability in the area.
In Jordan, 77 political and popular fronts announced a drive for large demonstrations in Amman next Friday, dubbed the Friday to Save the Homeland, to demand political and social reforms.
This is how the situation appears in Jordan, which hasn't seen a lull since the launch of the Arab revolutions last year as a result of the ongoing escalation of the popular movement. The Friday to Save the Homeland, or Friday's Worrisome March, is a Friday called for by the opposition Islamic movements. This comes at a time when tensions are increasing between the government and the opposition. Jordanian streets are erupting in anger due to the failure of the Tehran government to respond to protesters' demands. These demands are viewed by the Jordanian street as legitimate, with the absence of freedoms, deteriorating living conditions, and rising costs. As much as it disregards popular demands, the government is also deliberately applying a policy of incitement and intimidation against popular movements, specifically the Islamic ones, by filling the squares with its own supporters. In the framework of banning the Savior Friday March, which is planned for the coming Friday, a group calling itself Youths of Allegiance decided to protest in Al-Nakhil Square. This is also where the Islamists plan to hold their demonstration, in an approach that aims to obstruct the expected protest movement and deny the protesters their demands. The Jordanian street is treading in hot water between the opposition, which demands change, and supporters backed by the government who aim to cover up the crises that are battering Jordan. The most important of these crises is likely the scarcity of water. The shortage struck several parts of the country over the span of the last few months, as Jordan has witnessed the worst and most difficult summer months, according to the Secretary General of the Water Authority. Most Jordanians suffer from a chronic lack of water, in a country where the government provides the Israeli entity with a large part of its water supply under the reconciliation agreement known as the Wadi Araba Treaty. What makes things worse is that rainfall has fallen in the past years to below average, which caused an estimated shortage of 500 million cubic meters a year. Observers are warning of a brewing popular revolt that could engulf Jordan at any moment as a result of the deteriorating living conditions, as well as the government's stubbornness in disregarding the voices of the angry streets for over a year.
Now, a blast in southern Afghanistan takes the life of an American soldier. The Western military alliance has confirmed that the trooper died in an explosion without giving further details. Earlier, the Taliban militants claimed that they'd shot down an American helicopter in the southern province of Zabul. They said several US-led foreign soldiers died in the crash, but the Western military alliance says technical glitches forced the chopper to land. Since the beginning of this year, as many as 350 foreign troops have lost their lives in Afghanistan. Many of them died when Afghan security personnel turned their guns on their foreign colleagues. Well, the US reaches a grim milestone in its military offensive in Afghanistan. Though many of the troops from the surge have returned home, there are rising concerns over the number of insider attacks. Press TV's Colin Campbell has this report.
The challenges that come with a critically
The death toll among foreign soldiers in Afghanistan is rising. According to the latest count of U.S. war dead in Afghanistan, soldiers' deaths now stand above 2,120. At least 52 of them were killed this year in insider attacks by Afghan government forces or Taliban forces. The southern provinces of Kandahar and Helmand have proven to be the most deadly areas for U.S. troops. About half of U.S. soldiers have died in those regions. Experts say even strategic areas, such as key highways in the region, are still not secure.
It's very clear that they can't hold on to that highway. They can't prevent the Taliban from continuing to plant IEDs and cause severe consequences for U.S. troops.
Although it is Afghan civilians who are the #1 victims of the U.S. so-called war on terror, U.S. troop casualties are persistent. This is despite the 33,000 additional U.S. troops that withdrew from Afghanistan after troop size was increased after the surge. The rising casualties of troops is not being lost on the American public. The calls for troops to come home is growing louder from Congress to the internet. This letter urging for the immediate withdrawal of U.S. troops was posted over the internet saying, "I think tomorrow is not too soon to start the fastest drawdown in military history and be out of Afghanistan as fast as our military transports can get them out." During his monthly press conference in Brussels, NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen commented on recent insider attacks in Afghanistan. Rasmussen says that insider attacks are forcing U.S.-led troops to rethink their system of training Afghans as the Taliban have adapted their strategy to weaken Western forces.
This strategy aims at undermining trust and confidence, and to a certain degree it has also succeeded in that.
Military officials say they have made broad improvements in fighting the Taliban. However, the rising death toll of U.S. troops and the increase of insider attacks has many left thinking that the time for U.S. troops' complete withdrawal is well overdue. Colin Campbell, Press TV, Washington.
A young Bahraini activist has died of an illness while in custody. Mohammed Mushaima was in jail for taking part in anti-regime protests. Mushaima was serving a prison term of 7 years passed on to him last year. The 24-year-old was pronounced dead at a government hospital in the capital, Manama. Officials say he was suffering from a hereditary disease. Lawyers say they'd asked the court to release Mushaima because of his bad health, but their request had been denied. Several other anti-regime activists have died of illnesses while in custody over the past year. This has prompted Human Rights Watch to call for an investigation.
Freed prisoner Mahmoud al-Sarsak, who received an official invitation from the Barcelona club to attend the Spanish Clásico game next week, announced that he rejected the invitation after it was confirmed that Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit will be attending the game.
The continuing influx of solidarity activists at the headquarters of the International Committee of the Red Cross in Gaza every week is gaining momentum in the media, as well as at the popular and official levels. The latest development was the attendance by representatives of the Legislative Council at the weekly sit-in with the prisoners' families.
Today marks the launch of our Victory, Freedom, and Hope mobilization to support the resistance of our courageous prisoners. This will take place locally, regionally, and internationally. We at the committee will do everything we can to help the prisoners' families and relatives.
Here, the freed prisoner Mahmoud al-Sarsak determined his stance over the Barcelona club's invitation to attend the Clásico. He rejected the invitation in four-man content after the club insisted that Israeli soldier Gilad Shalit would attend, urging the international organization to stop equating the victim and the oppressor.
I apologize to the fans and the administration of the Catalonian club for not attending or participating for the following reason. Inviting Gilad Shalit to attend is equating the Zionist oppressor with a Palestinian victim, and therefore I will not attend. There is a big difference between arresting a soldier from inside his tank who wears a military uniform, holds a rifle, and kills defenseless innocents, and arresting a soccer player at the Beit Hanun military checkpoint.
Others felt the raging fire in the hearts of the prisoners' families and vowed to attend sit-in circles to express their solidarity. Because of their belief in their just cause, they will assuredly continue down this path until the dawn of freedom shines.
I am in solidarity with our prisoners, the prisoners of Palestine, and our female activists, our sisters, daughters. They are our brothers and sisters. Even if I am not related to any prisoners, we are still brothers and sisters. We must all look out for each other and stay in solidarity with each other until this case ends and until the sun of freedom shines on every prisoner.
This act of solidarity is growing with the growing prisoners' resistance inside the occupation's prisons. This site has become a meeting place for resistance, for the prisoners' relatives, and for those who are concerned about the case.
The views expressed on Mosaic are from contributing broadcasters, not Link TV or its sponsors. The production of Mosaic is made possible by grants from the John D. and Catherine T. MacArthur Foundation, the Wincoat Foundation, the Firedoll Foundation, and by support of viewers like you. Thank you. Watch Mosaic World News online. Stay up to date with breaking news, read our blog, get transcripts of past shows, and more at linktv.org/mosaic. Airwaves, a global channel of uncompromising stories, world news, documentaries, entertainment, and culture. Link TV, connecting you to the world. For more information, visit linktv.org.